In the 5th year of our marriage, I got pregnant. But the photo of my husband holding hands with my stepsister went viral. It was everywhere, overshadowing even the time he proposed to me. I sighed and wished them well. I heard that cheating during marriage makes divorce very costly. But my husband didn't mind. He preferred to leave with nothing and marry his true love. Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. The photo of Matthew Grant and Jeannie embracing at the airport was all over the internet, with a vibe of an official relationship announcement. Before I could figure out how to deal with both sets of parents, Jeannie had already posted an official announcement on her social media. A picture of 2 hands clasped together, with the family heirloom ring of the Grant family on her delicate finger. I sighed, wondering what to do next, as this situation was getting out of hand. Jeannie sent me a message. "Catherine, Matthew still loves me." I commented on her social media post. I heard that cheating during marriage makes divorce very costly. Matthew called me. "Catherine, do you know what I hate most about you? It's that you always look at everything so rationally and coldly, including me as your husband. I've had enough. I'd rather leave with nothing and marry Genie. I can't let her suffer." He can't let Genie suffer? A few years ago, Matthew had a severe illness, almost costing him his life. The Grant and Murphy families had an arranged marriage, and Matthew told both sets of parents that he liked me. So, right after I graduated from college and returned to the country, I was arranged to marry Matthew the next day. But I overheard a conversation between Matthew and my sister Jeannie after the engagement party. "I can't let you suffer. My illness might not get better. Jean, I want you to live well and happily." Jeannie cried in his arms, "No matter what illness you have, I'm willing to marry you." Matthew looked at her tenderly. "Silly, I don't want you to suffer." As it turned out, the next day, Jeannie, who said she would marry him no matter what illness he had, went abroad and disappeared. Apparently, during the years I was studying abroad, Matthew and Jeannie were already together, deeply in love. But due to the sudden illness, Matthew didn't want to let his true love suffer, so he married me instead. Jeannie went abroad to study and stayed away for 5 years. Matthew's health improved day by day after our marriage. My in-laws were overjoyed, believing it was my good fortune that brought about his recovery. My mother-in-law held my hand. "Kathy, we know that Matthew marrying you initially was a grievance for you. Don't worry, we will treat you like our own daughter." They kept their word, and for these 5 years, I lived a life of luxury in the Grant family. Matthew and I didn't have the intense love of couples who marry for love. But we respected each other. After 5 years of marriage, Matthew was full of energy, and Jeannie returned with a bang. Their intentions were obvious to everyone. Matthew came home at 10 that night, without the scent of another woman but the smell of hotel shower gel. He must have spent the night whispering sweet nothings with Jeannie at the hotel, showering before coming back. Seeing that I was still awake, he sat directly opposite me and got straight to the point. "Jeannie is back, Catherine. Let's get a divorce. You know I don't love you." I did have feelings for Matthew after 5 years of marriage. But no matter how much I liked him, it all faded in the face of his intense feelings for Jeannie. I looked at him, my eyes darkening. 5 years ago, you were dying and didn't want to let Jeannie suffer, so you sent her away and married me. 5 years later, you're fine, and you still don't want to let her suffer, so you want to divorce me. Have you ever thought about whether I'm suffering?" Matthew was silent for a moment, then spoke. "You've been independent since childhood. Nothing can defeat you, and you fear nothing. So, no one can make you suffer." I took a breath and asked him, "What about our parents? We are people, not puppets. Our divorce has nothing to do with them." How adorably naive he was. What made him think he could marry me when he wanted and divorce me when he wanted? I looked out the window at the garden filled with wisteria, my favorite flower. In the first 2 years of our marriage, when Matthew's health hadn't fully recovered, he did slow rehabilitation exercises in the garden. He asked me what my favorite flower was, and I casually mentioned wisteria. He planted a whole patch along the wall. When they bloomed, they looked like a purple mist, romantically unreal. He smiled at me from the wall. "I can't take you out to see flowers, so I planted these for you. Whenever I wasn't busy with work, I spent my free time walking and drinking tea with him under the wisteria trellis. It was then that I found out Matthew and I went to the same university. But he graduated just as I enrolled, so we missed each other perfectly. Back then, I thought we had some fate. I also felt that such post-marriage days weren't bad at all. The next day was the day for the two families to gather. I finished applying my makeup and saw that Matthew had even put on his cufflinks, which was rare. I smiled. It seemed that an important guest was coming. Sure enough, Jeanie came with parents. When she saw Matthew and me standing together at the door, she slightly lowered her head and quickened her steps to squeeze between us. She held my arm but looked up at Matthew. "Matt, I want to say a few words to my sister, do you mind?" Dad scolded her, "He's your brother-in-law, don't be disrespectful." Moo's stepmother interrupted Dad, "All right, they have a good relationship as sisters, don't interfere with the children's matters." Matthew looked at Jeanie dotingly. "This is your home, do as you please." "Really? Then I want to stay at my sister's place for a few more days." Matthew nodded, "You're very welcome." I smiled faintly. Was she planning to move in? The dinner was personally arranged by Matthew, and as the dishes were served, my fingers slowly curled up. Every dish on the table was one of Jeanie's favorites. Sweet and sour pork ribs, steamed fish, shrimp. Even the most troublesome crabs were served with the meat already picked out and placed in a flower-shaped dish. Mother-in-law frowned, "Why isn't there a single dish that Kathy likes?" What was the kitchen thinking? The chef wiped his sweat on the side, and Matthew smiled lightly. "Catherine isn't picky with food. Jean just returned from abroad, and I thought she would want to eat home-cooked dishes, so I made more of her favorites." Mother-in-law looked at him with a displeased expression. "You know Jeanie's tastes well, but how come you don't know your own wife's preferences?" "Kathy is allergic to seafood." Matthew realized he had gone too far and quickly tried to cover it up. "I'll ask the kitchen to make a few more dishes that Catherine likes." I shook my head, "No need, I don't have much of an appetite." Matthew stared at me coldly. "You're her sister. Your sister comes over, and you don't want to make a few more dishes she likes?" Father-in-law's face also darkened. Not wanting to waste time on this matter, I quickly mediated. "It's okay, I've been drinking bird's nest soup recently and don't feel like eating much." During the meal, everyone was chatting and laughing. Every time Jeanie finished a crab, Matthew would hand her another. Stepmother smiled and said, "Look at Jean and Matt, still sticking together like when they were kids." Jeanie leaned on Matthew's shoulder with a smile, her eyes curved into crescents. "Matt said he'll take me sea fishing next time." Matthew smiled indulgently, "There's plenty of time. Wherever you want to go, I'll take you." Another wave of fishy smell wafted over, and I couldn't hold back anymore. I covered my mouth and rushed to the bathroom. The family was alarmed, and mother-in-law anxiously called out, "Get Dr. Gray here." I stopped her. "Mom, no need. This is a normal reaction. I'm 2 months pregnant." Father-in-law and mother-in-law were overjoyed, and Dad looked at my face, worried about my health. Matthew's eyes were filled with disappointment and anger, while Jeanie's face turned pale, tears welling up in her eyes. "Hurry! Remove all these dishes and bring some nutritious soup. No more seafood in the house from now on. The sofa needs to be replaced with a soft one tomorrow, and the cushions need to be soft too." Jeanie bit her lip, struggling to maintain her expression. "Catherine, why did you keep this news a secret? People might think the child isn't Matt's and you're hiding it." Dad scolded her harshly, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Matthew's eyes were cold. "I just found out too. She always keeps things to herself and never shares anything." I smiled faintly. "I heard from the elders that within the first 3 months, the baby is very delicate and shouldn't be mentioned. Jeanie originally planned to stay, but because of my pregnancy, Dad took her home. Your sister needs rest. If you stay, you'll just disturb her. Go home and come back after 3 months." Jeanie reluctantly bit her lip and looked at Matthew. "Catherine, I'll come see you in a few days." As soon as they left, Matthew stared at me coldly. "Catherine, you did this on purpose, didn't you? You got pregnant knowing Jeanie was coming back? Why didn't you say you were pregnant before I mentioned divorce? How could I not know you were so calculating? Whether you're really pregnant or faking it, I'm definitely getting this divorce. Don't think you can use the child to tie me down, it won't work. I took out the pregnancy report, which clearly stated that I was 8 weeks pregnant. Before Jeanie came back, I was already confirmed pregnant. If it weren't for the seafood feast you cooked today, I wasn't planning to say anything. Matthew crumpled up the pregnancy report in his hand and threw it into the trash can. I don't want this child. I want it gone. I looked at him in shock. This is your child, and you don't want it? Although Matthew was fine now, his sudden illness back then had scared the Grant family half to death. So from the time we got married until now, the Grant family had been urging us to have children. Now that I'm pregnant, whether to keep it or not, he can't decide on his own. A child that wasn't expected, it's better not to have. My children will only be born by Genie. After all, we've been married for 5 years, even a dog would have feelings by now. Hearing his absurd words, I still thought of saying something to persuade him. But his phone rang, it was Genie. Matt, Catherine is pregnant, are we never going to be together? That night when you proposed to me and put the ring on my finger, you promised to love only me. I just want to love you properly, I just want to be with you, is that not possible? She can have your child, I can too, I don't want to leave you. Matthew's voice instantly became gentle. Don't cry, where are you? I'll come find you. At night, my phone received a message. I opened it, it was photos sent by Genie, all kinds of intimate photos of her and Matthew together. It was clear that their love was intense, inseparable, and passionate. Catherine, do you think you can tie his heart with a child? You'll never win against me. You might as well give up and leave gracefully. Idiot. I rolled my eyes, turned off my phone, and went to sleep. The next day, my in-laws had someone bring me to the old house. To welcome the child in my belly, even Grandma Grant rarely came out. Grandma took out a string of imperial green jade necklace and put it on me. This is the Grant family's heirloom, now it's passed on to you, good child. She can't have it. Matthew's voice sounded at the door. I want a divorce from Catherine Murphy. I turned around, and Matthew was holding Jeanie's hand as they walked in. Genie clung to Matthew's hand, leaning closely against him. My in-laws were shocked by his words. What did you say? Matthew stood straight. The one I love has always been Genie. I want a divorce from Catherine, I want to marry Genie. He stepped forward and yanked the necklace off my neck, leaving a bloody mark on my neck. This necklace is for the Grant family's daughter-in-law, it's Jeanies. My father-in-law slammed the table. You're going too far. My mother-in-law immediately brought something to stop my bleeding. Matt, are you crazy? Kathy is your wife, and she's pregnant with your child, you want a divorce? Matthew looked at them confidently. I'm an adult, I don't like Catherine. I had no choice when I married her. Now I want a divorce, don't I have the freedom to choose? Genie spoke with a tearful voice, Mr. and Mrs. Grant, Matt and I truly love each other, please let us be together. Saying this, she knelt in front of me with a thud. Catherine, you have always been the best since childhood, I can't compare to you in anything, nor do I dare to compete with you. But just this once, can you let me have it? I really love Matt. Genie wasn't actually my biological sister. When my stepmother married in, Genie was already 3 years old, originally named Jeannie Green. Later, to please my father, she changed her last name to Murphy. Since she was young, she was sweet-talking and coquettish, and every boy she met liked her. The one who liked her the most was Matthew. As long as she called Matt, Matthew would bring everything to her. Our Murphy family had deep roots, we weren't short of money to raise an extra daughter, and my father wasn't a petty person. So, whatever I had, Genie also had. What I didn't have, under my stepmother's secret maneuvering, Genie also had. Everyone saw this clearly. I just didn't care, after all, I was the real Murphy family member, and my father wasn't senile. But at this moment, I thought maybe I was wrong for not caring too much, which made Genie too greedy. Genie forgot her own identity, she was too greedy, wanting too much. I touched my belly, looked at the person kneeling on the ground, and softly spoke. You know I'm pregnant, can't get angry or be stimulated, yet you insist on causing a scene in front of me, telling me that you fell in love with your brother-in-law? If you loved him so much, why didn't you stay 5 years ago, stay with him through life and death? Why did you wait until he was fine to come back? Jeanie, don't use your cleverness in the wrong place. She looked up at me, with a look that only I could understand, and said gently, Catherine, I just love someone and want to fight for myself once. I stood up and walked over to Matthew. So, you were serious about wanting me to get rid of the baby yesterday? Matthew looked up, of course. My child will only be with Jeanie. A cane struck his back, it was Grandma Grant. Back when you were so ill you were close to dying, Catherine was still willing to marry you. Now that you're well, you want to repay her by being ungrateful and kicking her out? The Grant family won't allow it. You want a divorce, fine. But from now on, you will have no part in the Grant family's assets. Everything will be left to the child in Catherine's belly. Grandma Grant snatched the necklace from his hand. This was my dowry gift. I can give it to whomever I please. Father-in-law looked at Matthew with disappointment. Think carefully. If you divorce, you will lose all rights to the Grant family inheritance. Matthew proudly raised his head and spoke firmly. I don't want anything from the Grant family. I'll leave with nothing. Catherine, everything is as you wished. These will all be yours. It doesn't matter if you have the support of Mom and Dad and Grandma. I love Jeanie, and I will marry her. That won't change. Jeanie looked up at me with a mocking smile, as if to say, see, he loves me. No matter how good you are, he doesn't want you. I touched my belly, saying nothing. Jeanie stood up and tightly held Matthew's arm. This time, no matter what difficulties come our way, I will never leave Matt again. With that, the two of them walked out hand in hand, as if they had won a great victory. Father-in-law and mother-in-law watched Matthew leave in extreme disappointment. Father-in-law sighed. Truly hopeless. Let him walk the path he has chosen. My father soon learned about my decision to divorce, and he called me home to talk in his study. If you don't want to divorce, don't worry, no one can force you. I will always support you. I hadn't heard such words from my father in a long time, and my eyes welled up. Dad, I know Matthew's feelings for me aren't deep. But his mind and eyes aren't right, so let's just end it. I'm willing to divorce, having such a man by my side disgusts me. Dad was silent for a moment, then asked, what about the child? I touched my belly and said gently but firmly, I'll give birth to the baby and raise it myself. Dad nodded, it's okay, Dad is still in good health. When the time comes, we'll raise the child to become the successor of the Murphy family. I looked at Dad in surprise, and he smiled at me. I've told you before, Porter Murphy has only one daughter, Catherine Murphy. The Murphy family will only be handed over to you. I smiled at Dad. Jeanie, if she knew she wouldn't get a penny, I wonder what she would think. My divorce from Matthew was finalized smoothly. When signing the agreement, I added a clause for him to sign. It stated that he would give up all Grant family assets, including shares and inheritance rights. Matthew's shares were all transferred to me, and when my child turns 18, I will hand these shares over to him or her. Mother-in-law held my hand. From now on, we won't have a daughter-in-law, but we'll have a daughter and a grandchild. Matthew will have nothing to do with the Grant family from now on. Matthew sneered and left. On the day we received our divorce certificates, Matthew took the certificate in his left hand and held Jeanie's hand in his right, heading straight to register their marriage. Jeanie looked at me, her smile as bright as a flower. Catherine, from now on, Matthew will be your brother-in-law. Remember to keep your distance, or I'll get jealous. After the divorce, I moved out of the villa. I never wanted to go back to that place again. The new house was being renovated, and at my father's insistence, I moved back home to rest and take care of my pregnancy. My stepmother and Jeanie were discussing the wedding arrangements with the wedding planner. I like white roses, they must all be imported by air, and they should arrive 2 days before the wedding. The caviar has to be the best, and the banquet should be all seafood, I like it that way, money is not an issue. I want this wedding dress, with 999 diamonds on it, for everlasting happiness and good fortune. Seeing me come in, my stepmother smiled and said, Catherine's back, lunch will be ready soon. Are you staying here tonight? My father frowned from the side. Catherine is starting to stay here from today. Jeanie covered her mouth dramatically. Oh, Dad, I've picked out a lot of brides' dresses these past 2 days and there's no place to put them. So I had them placed in Sister's room. It's a mess in there. How about she stays in the guest room? It's a bit small, but since you're alone, you don't need a big space anyway. The villa fell silent immediately. She really forgot that her surname was actually Green, not Murphy. However, my stepmother reacted, No, I'll have someone tidy it up right away. Jean, how could you pile your clothes in your sister's room? Even if your sister is generous, you can't be so inconsiderate. One playing the good cop, the other the bad cop, what a show. I smiled and spoke up. No need, Jeanie has already turned the biggest room into the bridal chamber, saying she would move out from there on the wedding day. Since it's not the wedding day yet, I'll stay there for now. When my room is ready, I'll move back. Jeanie is so gentle and understanding, you surely wouldn't mind. After all, isn't it because Matthew likes you for being gentle, considerate, and understanding? Jeanie's face turned red with anger, and tears started streaming down her face. Catherine, I know you're angry about me marrying Matthew. But that room is where I'll be moving out from on my wedding day. It's not auspicious for you to stay there. My father laughed angrily and took over the conversation. Not auspicious? My daughter living in her own home, what's not auspicious about that? If you think it's not auspicious, you can stay in a hotel on your wedding day. The whole house fell silent, my stepmother's face turned ugly, and Jeanie's tears flowed even more. I held my waist. Bobby, where's my room? I need a nap. The door wasn't closed, and I could hear my stepmother crying outside. Porter, you're too biased. Both are your daughters, how can you do this? My father's voice came through. I'm too biased towards Jeanie. Stealing her sister's husband, such a disgrace. If Jeanie were my biological daughter, I would have slapped her already. I won't attend this wedding, I can't slap my own biological daughter. I've decided, Jeanie's wedding won't be from the Murphy house, she can stay in a hotel. I, Porter Murphy, won't let others gossip that with a stepmother, Catherine gets a stepfather who bullies her. The stepmother screamed, Why? I've been married to you for 20 years, why can't Jeanie move out from the Murphy house? Just because she stole Catherine's husband. Why didn't she marry Matthew when he was dying? What did you say back then? You said she wasn't my biological daughter, and the marriage between the Murphy and Grant families wasn't her turn. Now she's a Murphy daughter again? She doesn't get the bad things, but takes all the good ones? You two are dreaming too beautifully. Just because I didn't speak up doesn't mean I don't understand. If you're not satisfied, you can stay in the hotel with her. If you want to eat from the Murphy family, you need to understand who the real Murphy family members are. Listening to my father's words, I completely relaxed and closed the door. I had a beautiful nap. Nothing was more important than taking care of my pregnancy now. Jeanie was unwilling to give up. The next morning, while I was having morning tea, she deliberately brought photos of her new house with Matthew to show me. Catherine, you know Matthew is so thoughtful. He heard I like white roses, so he uprooted all the wisteria in the yard and replaced them with roses. The entire wall of wisteria had fallen to the ground, trampling the pale purple petals into the mud. I glanced at it indifferently without saying a word. Jeanie laughed again. The jewelry we saw at the auction last time, Matthew bought it for me to wear on our wedding day. It's so extravagant. That set of sapphire jewelry. I was stunned, as if I could hear Matthew's voice in my ears. Catherine, when we celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary, I'll buy you that sapphire set you like. Now, the jewelry has been bought, but it's no longer for me. I called the Grant family's lawyer and asked one question. Didn't Matthew leave with nothing? How is he still living in the villa and using the card? The lawyer replied, Ma'am, the legal team is still calculating the shares and hasn't had time to reclaim the villa. The card has been deactivated today. Jeanie came home in the evening with Matthew, rushed straight to me, and pointed at my nose to curse. You're so vicious. You're jealous that Matthew planted a garden full of flowers for me. And you actually asked the Grant family to reclaim the villa. On what grounds? As she spoke, she tried to push me, but the bodyguard behind me grabbed her hand, almost twisting it. I looked at the two of them and said, Matthew, you left with nothing. How can you still live in the Grant family's house, drive their car, and use their card? Matthew stared at me with an ugly expression. I'm the only son of the Grant family. Even if I said I left with nothing, what can they do to me? The Grant family will still rely on me in the future. You're overthinking it. The Grant family has nothing to do with you anymore. My father-in-law and mother-in-law appeared together at the door. They had arranged to come and see the child in my womb. I had just had an ultrasound today and sent them the photos. They were so happy that they came over immediately. My father-in-law looked disdainful. The bills from your wedding company and any future expenses should no longer be sent to the Grant Corporation. I've already instructed the finance department, no one will pay for you anymore. Fine. You want to kick me out, but don't come begging me to return in the future. Matthew and Jeanie were kicked out of the villa, their car was taken back, and their card was deactivated. They relied on Jeanie's stepmother, who used her own private money to buy a house for them as a wedding home. But compared to the villa they were used to, it was like a sparrow's nest. At Matthew and Jeanie's wedding, many people attended. But the business people are all shrewd. When they noticed that no one from the Grant family came and only Jeanie's mother from the Murphy family was present, not even my father, they roughly understood what was going on. Many people greeted the newlyweds and then left, leaving only the younger generation to attend the wedding. The scene became a bit cold. But fortunately, they were all young people who could still entertain themselves. These rich second-generation people didn't care who married whom, as long as there was good food and drink. But some keen-eyed ones whispered, "Why didn't Matthew's parents come? Don't you know he had a fallout with his family? Left with nothing. Left with nothing? For this Jeanie? This stepdaughter of the Murphy family has some tricks up her sleeve. Just a mistress rising to the top, tisk." The stepmother's face grew uglier, and my friend gleefully sent me live updates. Jeanie's jewelry is all old pieces her mother wore before. She lost all face. The wedding dress was also changed to a cheaper one, haha. The 999 diamonds she bragged about on social media were replaced with cubic zirconia, barely worth anything. Oh my, I'm dying of laughter. But the most exciting part was at the banquet after the wedding. When the wedding company's job was done, they brought the bill to the newlyweds for payment, and a dispute arose. Are you afraid we won't pay the $5 million bill? Don't you know I'm the second daughter of the Murphy family? The wedding company staff smiled. Miss Murphy, no matter whose daughter you are, according to the rules, the payment is due now. Jeanie looked at Matthew. Honey, pay them and send them away. It's so unlucky. Matthew stared at her. Where do I have money? I married you with nothing, baby, did you forget? Jeanie stood with her mouth open, unable to close it for a long time. Leaving with nothing was just a term to her, she couldn't imagine the actual state after it happened. Matthew really had nothing left, which was completely beyond her expectations. You are the only son of the Grant family. The Grant family's money is your money. Leaving with nothing is just a joke, right? Would they really leave you to die? Call your parents. Matthew dialed the Grant family's number as she suggested. The butler answered. The butler was polite on the other end. Young Master, Mr. and Mrs. Grant have said that no one in the Grant family can help you relay messages or pay money for you. Mr. and Mrs. Grant are out shopping for baby supplies and setting up the nursery, they are not at home. The faces of the wedding company staff started to look bad. No way, you're not going to renege on the bill, are you? Hey, tell the hotel not to serve the dishes yet. What if they don't pay? Let's cancel the banquet first and get back as much money as we can. It wasn't just about whether the hotel would serve the dishes. The hotel manager had already heard the commotion and was worried that Matthew and Jeanie wouldn't be able to pay the final balance for the banquet. Before the dishes were served, they brought the bill directly. Mr. Grant, sorry for the inconvenience, but could you please settle the bill first, and then we'll serve the dishes immediately. Matthew's face turned pale, and Jeanie's eyes filled with tears. The hotel manager and the wedding company manager surrounded the newlyweds, asking for payment. The guests waiting for the banquet started to discuss among themselves. Matthew pulled a familiar friend aside. Dawson, could you help me out and pay these bills first? I'll pay you back later. That rich second-generation friend, who was also a regular at eating, drinking, and having fun, took out his phone immediately. Sure. But when he saw the bill, he put his phone back in his pocket. Matthew, a few tens of thousands is doable, but this is a few million. Who has that kind of money? Even if I dared to pay, my dad would break my legs. In the end, it was Jeannie's mother who rushed over and paid the bill, barely managing to save the situation. However, the news about Matthew and Jeannie's wedding quickly spread, causing a scandal throughout the city. But I was no longer interested in their affairs. After the pregnancy stabilized for 3 months, I began to take over the businesses of the Murphy and Grant corporations. Both companies had capable employees, so I got the hang of things quickly. Ever since they found out I was expecting a son, my in-laws have been overjoyed. My mother-in-law transferred 5% of her shares to me as a reward. On my father-in-law's birthday, my belly was already 8 months pregnant, and he used his birthday as an occasion to throw a big party. Halfway through the banquet, my father-in-law announced to everyone that the child in my belly would be the heir to the Grant family. I object. It was Matthew who came with Genie. Matthew looked much worse than he did right after the divorce, and Jeannie's dress was an old one from last year. It seemed their lives had really deteriorated. They walked in, and Matthew touched Jeannie's belly with a smug expression. Dad, Mom, Jeannie is also pregnant now. The child in her belly is the real heir to the Grant family. My father-in-law looked at him coldly. Matthew, when you divorced, I said that as long as you divorced, the inheritance of the Grant family would have nothing to do with you. And you also signed an agreement to give up the inheritance. Matthew was indifferent. That was a temporary measure. Now Jeannie is pregnant with your grandchild. Are you going to hand the Grant family over to an outsider and not give it to your own grandson? My mother-in-law stared at them both and then turned her head away. The Grant family already has a grandchild. Only the child in Catherine's belly is recognized by us. Any other random cat or dog should stay away. Jeannie touched her belly and looked at me timidly. Catherine, the children in our bellies are half-siblings. This is a close family relationship. Can you persuade Mom and Dad to accept Matthew again? After all, he is the father of the children. I remained silent. She took a step closer, with a smile on her face but whispering softly. Catherine, there's an old saying that pregnant women who give birth early have a 50-50 chance of survival. Do you think the child in your belly will survive? After saying that, she pretended to trip on her dress and fall backward, grabbing my hand tightly. Her words made me wary, but I never expected that she would be so ruthless as to not even care about herself to harm me. As a result, I was still pulled down by her. She rolled down the stairs, and because I stepped aside, I only slid down 2 steps. I was drenched in cold sweat, tightly protecting my stomach. When landing, I tried to turn my body over so that my butt hit the ground first. I held my stomach, enduring the pain. Save my baby. Guests downstairs screamed, Jeannie is bleeding. I had a threatened miscarriage, and the baby was born prematurely. As soon as we arrived at the hospital, I was rushed into the operating room. The baby was delivered by C-section and placed in an incubator. When I was wheeled out of the operating room, it was already dawn. My father and my in-laws had been waiting at the door. My father looked at me with tears in his eyes. Sweetie, it's okay now. The baby is fine. Take good care of yourself and don't think about anything else. Daddy will handle everything. My mother-in-law added, yes, don't worry, we are here for you. Jeannie had a miscarriage. Before she was discharged from the hospital, my father had all her belongings thrown out of the Murphy house. He told my stepmother, if you acknowledge her as your daughter, we will divorce, and you can leave with her. If you sever ties with her, you can continue to stay as Mrs. Murphy. My stepmother cried, but Jeannie is also the daughter you've watched grow up. She almost killed my daughter. It's already merciful that I didn't send her to prison. If you can't bear to part with her, feel free to leave with her. I can sign the divorce papers anytime. The palm is one's own wealth, the back of the hand is the daughter. My stepmother chose her own wealth without hesitation. Who could be more important than herself? When Jeannie was discharged from the hospital, she found that her family had already kicked her out. She stood outside the Murphy house, shouting, "Dad, Mom, I'm your daughter." My father stood inside the door, looking at her. "When your mother married into the Murphy family, I pitied you for being young and treated you like my own daughter. But you were ungrateful and greedy, even trying to take Catherine's things. Have you forgotten that your name is Jeannie Green, not Jeannie Murphy? My daughter is only Catherine. Now, the Murphy family does not welcome you. You don't need to come back anymore." After driving Jeannie away, my father set a limit on my stepmother's credit card. Any usage over the limit would be known to him, to prevent her from secretly giving money to them. Jeannie returned to the small home she shared with Matthew, only to find him lying at home, drunk. The floor was littered with wine bottles, and the room reeked of wine. She broke down. "Matthew, you are a man who needs to support the family. Now you live off me every day. Are you a freeloader?" Matthew, half drunk, pointed at her with a wine bottle. "Who am I doing this for? It's all because of you that I divorced and lost everything from the Grant family. Who do you think you are to criticize me? All you think about is money, buying, jewelry, and bags. Do you think you deserve it? You're just a burden, pretending to be a rich young lady. Do you think you qualify?" The two of them fought over money. The next time I heard about them was at my son's first birthday party. My in-laws named the child Carlton, with the nickname Carl. Learning from his father's mistakes, everyone paid great attention to Carl's education, loving him but not spoiling him. My best friend came over with a drink and gossip, telling me that Jeannie and Matthew had divorced. Because Jeannie found out that Matthew had indeed been disowned by the Grant family and would not inherit the family business, she immediately dumped him and moved on to someone else. She went alone to Los Angeles, but for some reason, the men who took an interest in her were all older wealthy businessmen. And they all left after a while, unwilling to marry her. Gradually, her reputation deteriorated. I heard that she is now getting more and more down and out, looking like she's in her 40s even though she's in her 20s. As for Matthew, he went back to the Grant family several times to repent, but no one paid attention to him. After all, my in-laws had a new focus, which was Carl. They found that grooming Carl as the next heir was more useful and fulfilling than grooming their son. Matthew left, and no one cared where he went. A useless rich man, apart from being arrogant, had nothing to show for. I had officially taken control of both the Grant and Murphy companies, becoming a renowned businesswoman in J City. In my spare time, I would hold Carl in the CEO's office at the top floor of Grant Corporation, pointing to the world outside and telling him, "Carl, this will all be yours in the future." Carl would giggle and throw himself into my arms, kissing my face, "Mommy,